man didn't stop. People rarely did, especially someone like him. Sharp suit, polished shoes, wristwatch worth more than the average annual salary. He was pushing a wheelchair. His daughter sat in it, maybe 9 or 10. Pale, thin, distant eyes. She didn't look around, didn't smile. Her hands rested lifelessly in her lap. Her legs, unmoving, lay still beneath her. A small voice reached out, cracking slightly from thirst. "Sir, please, I can help your daughter." He paused. That was new. People usually asked him for money. But this boy, dirty, barefoot, sitting cross-legged by the curb, he hadn't asked for food or coins. Just those words. The man turned slowly, his grip tightening on the wheelchair. "What did you say?" The boy didn't blink. His eyes, the only part of him that looked alive, stared straight at the girl. "I can make her walk again." The millionaire looked at the boy for a moment longer, then burst out laughing. Not mockingly, but with disbelief. "Is that so?" "She doesn't move, not even a little," the boy said quietly. "But I can help." The man's name was Julian Rowe, CEO of a tech firm, investor, public speaker, a man people admired, or at least pretended to. His daughter Clara had been paralyzed for 8 months following an accident. No treatments had worked. Specialists had given up. She wasn't just physically trapped, emotionally too. Her light was fading. Julian bent down slightly, narrowing his eyes. "What's your name, boy?" "Tyron," he replied. "And what do you think you can do that 10 doctors couldn't?" Tyron glanced at Clara again. "I don't think. I know." Julian exhaled slowly and stood up. This wasn't worth it. Just another street kid with stories. Still, something about the boy's tone. It wasn't arrogant. It wasn't desperate. It was certain. "What are you, some kind of healer?" Julian asked sarcastically. "No," Tyron said. "But I've seen things, and I know when something's not broken. Your daughter's legs aren't broken." Julian's expression tightened. He hated when people pretended to understand her condition. Tyron saw it. "I'm not saying she's faking. I know she's hurting. But her legs, they're not the reason she can't walk." Julian looked down at Clara. She was staring at Tyron quietly, like she was trying to remember something long forgotten. "All right," Julian said, voice sharp. "You've got 1 minute. Say what you came to say." Tyron nodded and stood up, brushing dirt off his shorts. She's scared. Her body locked itself because it thought it was protecting her. But now it doesn't know how to unlock. She needs to believe she's safe again. Julian scoffed. "And what, you're a therapist now too?" But I've lived what she's living. I know how to speak to her body the way it listens." "You're 10. 11, Tyron corrected. "Almost 12. Julian didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to walk away, but something kept his feet rooted. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even curiosity. It was the strange calm in Tyron's voice, the complete lack of fear. Clara's hand twitched. Julian saw it. He wasn't imagining it. It hadn't moved in months. Tyron saw it too, but he didn't react. "Do you want her to try?" he asked. "Not tomorrow, not someday, right now." Julian hesitated, then looked around. A few people had stopped, watching quietly. "What do you want?" he asked cautiously. "Money?" Tyron shook his head. "Just one chance." Julian stared at him for another second, then stepped back. "Clara," Tyron said, walking closer, "you're safe." She blinked. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Clara turned her head slightly, the first voluntary movement in weeks. "Your legs are waiting," Tyron said gently. "They haven't left you. You left them. Julian's heart pounded. This was absurd, insane. But Clara's chest was rising faster now. Her lips parted. Come back, Tyron whispered. Just once. Try. And that was when Clara shifted. Not fully, not dramatically, but her toes flexed. Julian dropped to his knees. Clara? He whispered. Tyron stepped back. She's almost there. But it's not me who'll make her walk again. It's her. I just reminded her how. Julian looked at him like he was seeing something impossible. But Tyron just sat back down on the curb, as if he hadn't just changed everything. Julian didn't leave, not for minutes. Clara's fingers were twitching now, her lips trying to form words. He turned to Tyron. Who are you, really? Tyron didn't answer. He simply looked at Clara and smiled. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat beside Clara's bed, watching her. Every so often, her fingers would curl slightly, or a toe would twitch beneath the blanket. Subtle, uncertain movements, like her body was waking from a long sleep. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The boy, Tyron, 11 years old, barefoot, skin tanned from sun and soot, yet he'd spoken like someone far older, like someone who'd carried pain and learned to survive it. Julian wasn't a man easily impressed. Years in business had taught him how to spot fakes from a mile away. But Tyron hadn't wanted anything. Not a coin, not praise. Just a moment with Clara. And whatever he'd done, whatever he'd said, it had started something no therapy or treatment had managed to. By morning, Julian couldn't ignore it anymore. Clara was awake. Really awake. Eyes alert, head following sounds, even a smile when the nurse greeted her. Her body wasn't healed. Not yet. But the fog was lifting. At breakfast, Julian sat across from her, trying not to stare at her hands. She picked up her spoon herself. It was clumsy, slow, but it was movement. Clara, he asked softly, what did the boy say to you yesterday? She paused. He told me it's okay to come back. Julian swallowed. Come back from where? I don't know. She looked down at her lap. I just know it didn't feel so far when he said it. Later that day, Julian returned to the same street, pushing Clara again. She didn't argue. In fact, she seemed curious. But Tyron was gone. The corner where he'd sat was empty. No trace of him, not even chalk marks or scraps of cloth. Just cold concrete and passing shoes. Julian waited. 10 minutes, then 30, an hour. Clara looked around too, quietly, as if trying to hear the sound of his voice again. But he didn't come. Julian spoke to vendors nearby, but most just shrugged. One woman selling bottled water said, "The boy? Yeah, he's around sometimes. Not every day, though. Comes and goes like the wind." That bothered Julian more than he expected. For the next few days, he made it a routine. Drive to the corner, park, wait. Sometimes with Clara, sometimes alone. But Tyron never showed. And yet, Clara continued to improve. The hospital reports were still cautious. Encouraging signs, possible psychosomatic barriers lowering. But Julian knew what he saw. Her shoulders were no longer slumped. Her eyes held more light. She laughed once at breakfast. He hadn't heard her laugh in almost a year. Still, the question haunted him. Who was that boy? And how had he known? By the fourth day, Julian made a decision. He called in a favor from a former journalist friend. Gave her a description, the time, the place. If anyone knows the kids that hang around that area, it's you. She laughed over the phone. You want me to find one street kid in a city of millions? I'll double your usual rate. You always do, she replied. All right, I'll see what I can dig up. Meanwhile, Clara asked more about him each day. Why do you think he said he'd help me? I don't know, Julian admitted. But he did. She paused. He wasn't scared of me. That hit Julian harder than he expected. Why would anyone be scared of you? Because I'm broken, she said. Then she looked up. Or, I was. Julian held her hand, and for the first time she squeezed back. 3 more days passed. Then the journalist called. I found him. Julian was in the car 10 minutes later. The address she gave wasn't really an address, just a section of an old shipping yard turned into makeshift housing. Rusted fences, sagging tents, wooden pallets propped into walls. It looked abandoned, but people lived there. Kids, too. Julian stepped out cautiously. He stood out like a billboard. Tailored clothes, expensive watch, polished shoes. A teenager looked at him warily. You lost or something? I'm looking for a boy. Name's Tyron. About 11. The teen squinted. He ain't here. Comes around sometimes, but he doesn't stay. Doesn't talk much either. Julian nodded, then offered a crisp 100. If he shows up, tell him Julian Rowe is looking for him. The teen took the bill, eyeing Julian with more interest now. Sure thing, boss. That night, Julian sat by Clara's bed again. She was reading now, holding the book herself, slowly, but with both hands. You really want to find him, she said. I need to. Because you want to thank him? Julian hesitated. Yes, but also because there's something I don't understand. And I need to. That night, Julian dreamed of a street lined with shadows. At the end of it, a small boy sat cross-legged, smiling gently, whispering things the wind carried away. When he woke up, his phone had a message. It was a video. A grainy clip taken by the teenager. In it, Tyron sat by a wall, staring ahead. He didn't speak, just waited. Like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Julian saved the video, watched it 5 times. Then he saw something in the corner of the frame. A little girl in rags holding a tin can. Her walk was strange, one leg dragging slightly, but her face was lit up with laughter. And Tyron, as she passed, raised his hand. She waved back with both arms. Julian stared at the screen, heart pounding. He didn't know her, but she'd been walking, and she'd passed by Tyron. Julian hadn't told anyone about the video, not even Clara. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt like a thread, something fragile, something that could snap if tugged too hard. But he couldn't stop watching it. That little girl with the dragging leg. She had walked. Awkwardly, yes, but walked. And Tyron had just been sitting there, watching, like always. No theatrics, no speeches, just presence. It wasn't healing in any traditional sense. No touching foreheads, no dramatic transformations. But it was real. Whatever was happening, whoever Tyron was, it was real. Julian returned to the shipping yard 3 times that week. Each time, the teen who had taken the video just shrugged. He doesn't stay in one place, man. But I'll keep my eyes open. So Julian started trying something else. He brought food, water bottles, blankets, quiet generosity, without cameras or announcements. At first, most ignored him. Some didn't trust it. But slowly the wall thinned. A few nodded in recognition. One older woman offered a weak smile. Julian never asked questions. He didn't need to. He knew the world had been cruel to these people. Asking for their stories felt like stealing, but his presence got noticed. And 5 days later, Tyron appeared again. Not with fanfare, not with noise. He was just there. Same spot on the curb, legs crossed, eyes calm, as if he'd never left. Julian froze. He was in the middle of passing out sandwiches, a basket on his arm, when he saw the boy. Their eyes met. Tyron nodded slightly, like he'd been expecting this. Julian walked over slowly and sat down beside him. No words at first, just silence. Then Julian said, "I've been looking for you." "I know," Tyron replied. Julian studied him. "Who taught you to do what you do?" "No one." "You're telling me you just know how people work?" Tyron didn't answer directly. People talk loud with their pain. It's not hard to listen if you want to. Julian let that sit. The girl in the video, with the limp, she walked past you. Tyron's expression didn't change. She believed she could. I just reminded her she wasn't alone. Julian shook his head. "But how? You're just a kid. This isn't normal." "I'm not magic," Tyron said. "I'm just not scared of people's broken pieces." Julian looked away. "Most people are." Tyron glanced at him. "Are you?" Julian didn't answer. He thought about Clara, her tiny, shaking hand as it curled around a spoon, her quiet voice telling him she wasn't broken anymore, the light coming back into her eyes. "I was," Julian said finally. "Maybe I still am." Tyron nodded. "It's okay. Fear doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're listening." Julian turned to him. "You could help so many people. Why don't you go to a hospital, work with therapists?" Tyron looked down. They wouldn't listen. Not until someone important believed first. Julian paused, then said, "What if I listened?" Tyron tilted his head. "You already are." Julian exhaled slowly. "Will you come see Clara again?" "If she wants me to." "She does." That afternoon, Clara was waiting on the bench outside their home, eyes scanning the driveway. When Tyron stepped out of the car, her face lit up, not in surprise but in recognition, like seeing someone who had been gone a long time, but never truly far. He sat beside her. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Instead, he told her a story. Not with drama, not with a point. Just a simple story about a cat that had gotten lost and found its way back home after many days, only to discover that the house was still there, and that someone had kept the porch light on the whole time. Clara listened. She didn't blink. And then, slowly, her legs shifted under the blanket. Julian saw it from the porch. Her right leg moved first, an inch, maybe two. Then the left, small, trembling, unsure. She was moving. Clara looked at Tyron with wide eyes. "It's happening." He nodded. "You remembered the way back." Tears streamed down Julian's face. He didn't try to stop them. Later that evening, Julian sat Tyron down at the kitchen table. He slid an envelope toward him. Tyron didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Enough money to change your life," Julian said. "Get you off the streets, into a home, school, anything you want." Tyron stared at it, then he pushed it back gently. Julian frowned. "Why?" "I don't need money. I need people to believe." "Believe what?" "That broken doesn't mean ruined. That healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from being seen." Julian shook his head. "You're 11. "Almost 12, Tyron said again, smiling softly. Julian laughed, wiping his face. "Of course you are." Before he left, Tyron looked at him and said, "One day, your daughter will run. When she does, don't forget why she stopped walking in the first place." Julian's smile faded. "Why did she?" Tyron looked out the window. "Because she thought it was her fault." Julian's breath caught in his throat. "She thought you were angry with her," Tyron said. "Even if you never said it." Julian sat down heavily. I never blamed her. Not once. But sometimes silence feels louder than words, Tyron whispered. She needed to hear that it wasn't her burden to carry. The door closed behind him, and Julian sat there in the quiet, thinking about everything he had said and everything he hadn't. Julian spent the night watching old home videos of Clara, the ones from before the accident. He hadn't looked at them in months, maybe longer. It hurt too much. The laughter, the running, the way she used to dance barefoot in the living room, spinning in circles until she fell down laughing. In the silence of his study, he realized how long it had been since their house had felt like a home. The next morning, Clara stood. Not a dream, not a slow, careful attempt. She stood. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her knees shaking, but she rose fully upright, her eyes wide with shock, with disbelief. But there she was, on her feet. Julian saw it from the hallway. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then she turned to him and whispered, "I just remembered how it felt." He rushed to her but didn't touch her. She didn't want help. He could see it in her eyes. Instead, he stood close, silent, proud. Clara didn't walk that day, not yet, but she stood again. Twice, then 3 times. Later that week, with a walker, she crossed the room. Each step awkward and uncertain, but each one hers. She was healing, not miraculously, not instantly, but undeniably. Word of her progress reached the doctors. They called it an extraordinary case of psychosomatic recovery. Some hinted at reawakened neural pathways, others at suppressed trauma being released. But none had answers. Only Julian knew the truth, and Tyron was gone again. No one had seen him. The teen at the yard said he'd left without a word. No trail, no clue. Julian looked for him, every day for 2 weeks. But there was no trace, until one day a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp, just slid under the door, folded twice. It read, "You don't need to find me. You found her. Don't forget. She walked because she believed again. Keep reminding her." T. Julian sat on the porch with the note for an hour. Then he framed it. Weeks passed. Clara continued to improve. The walker turned to a cane. The cane eventually stayed by the door. She returned to school. Kids stared at first. How could they not? But she smiled through it, taller than her steps. Clint started something new. He opened a foundation in Clara's name, one that helped street children get into schools, get food, therapy, shelter. He didn't tell anyone it was inspired by a boy he met on a sidewalk. But it was. One day, during a fundraiser, Clara took the microphone herself. She stood in front of hundreds. No cane, no help. And she told her story. Not the accident, the healing. She didn't use Tyron's name, just called him a boy who reminded me I was still here. Afterward, people lined up to meet her, shake her hand, tell her she was brave. But Julian watched her from the side of the stage, wondering if Tyron had somehow seen it all. If he was standing somewhere, hidden in the crowd, watching quietly like he always did. Then Clara ran. Not far, just from the edge of the stage to his arms. But she ran. And when she hugged him, she whispered, "I'm not broken anymore." Julian held her tightly. "No," he said, voice thick. "You never were." The world kept spinning. Years later, Clara would give speeches in cities across the country, always sharing her story, always ending with the same line. Healing isn't about fixing what's wrong. It's about remembering what's right. And sometimes, when the room was quiet, she'd pause, just long enough for the audience to wonder why. And she'd smile, because in her mind, she could still see that boy sitting on a sidewalk, head tilted, eyes calm, telling her without words that she was never alone.